many of the migrants coming in are low-skilled, low-wage migrants. Now, I'm not against migration. I think I can be cast as being anti-migration. But the scale and the pace that it's happened at is totally unreasonable and unsustainable.
Suella, thank you for joining Spectator TV today. Your first appearance here since you left your role as Home Secretary, which I think is nearly 6 months ago now. How do you think the government is doing in your absence?
Listen, it was a great honour. It's a great privilege to serve in a great office of state as Home Secretary and to be around the cabinet table. And I was really disappointed to have left government because I care really passionately about some of the subjects we were working on, like stopping the boats, like better policing and national security. Since I've left, I think the polls speak for themselves. We're doing quite badly when it comes to the polling. Reform has had a resurgence.
Yeah, growth spurt.
A growth spurt, yes, and a very fast rise, and you can trace it back to November. So, they were polling at around 3 or 4% prior to November this time last year. After November, they've really gone up to about 13%, as we've seen in some of the elections that they've been standing in. So I think there's a real threat now that's emerged from the right of British politics. And actually, if you look at British politics as a whole, there's a much greater scramble for the centre ground, such that Labour and the Conservatives are actually almost becoming indistinguishable, I would say. I speak to a lot of people on the doorstep. They say, what's the difference between you and the Labour Party on tax, on migration? I say I dread a Labour government, but it is quite hard on a policy platform to distinguish us right now. And actually, the bigger distinction and battleground is more on the right of British politics between Conservatives and Reform.
That's an interesting point you make about the change in November on Reform. So I wonder, do you link some of that to your departure, or I suppose at the same time as you were leaving, Rishi Sunak's choice to let you go, David Cameron was coming back in, and it was certainly read at the time as a sign that Rishi Sunak was moving back towards the centre or the Cameroon consensus. Now, Number 10 denied that and said you shouldn't overread into this, but do you think voters got a sense of that?
I think they did, and I think that explains the polling, but I think that's been played out not just in the personalities, but also the policies. So if you look at the budget, I don't believe we went far enough on tax cuts. I think we should have cut income tax or raised income tax thresholds. That would have helped a larger number of people, like workers and pensioners. I think we tweaked and we didn't really do what was necessary to distinguish ourselves from Labour, but also restore our, credibility as a low-tax party. On migration, I don't think we've done nearly enough on legal migration, for example. I think the Prime Minister was kind of under duress in November when he announced some of the measures to tackle legal migration. Just, you'll know, and your listeners will know, we've reached unprecedented levels of net migration. Last November, the number hit 700,000 odd. Compare that to about 240,000 net migration in 2019 when we pledged to lower numbers. What we need is a cap on overall numbers. That's what the Prime Minister should do to demonstrate to the British people that we're serious about getting numbers down. And then obviously on the boats, I think far more robust action is required on the human rights regime to which we're subject, which is really the main obstacle to us fixing that problem. And I think that the fact that we haven't done those necessary things has meant that we've abandoned some of those 2019 Tory voters who voted for us in parts of the country where they've never voted Conservative and in large numbers. And I think that's a miscalculation by the Prime Minister and the Number 10 team.
I want to pick up on some of those points. I suppose if we were going to think about what the other side would be saying in this discussion, you had some figures in government who would say they had no choice but to cut you from government because your rhetoric was turning off the Tory base. And I wanted to know, what do you say to that?
Well, listen, I think that I've always tried to be someone who is honest with people, and I've tried to make my time as Home Secretary count and I wanted it to mean something. And so I don't think I said anything misleading. I don't think I said anything wrong. And I think all of the things I talked about, whether it was on the boats, whether it was about multiculturalism, whether it was about policing, whether it was about broader home affairs issues, ultimately, I think honesty is essential in politics. And it might make some parts of society, polite society, uncomfortable. And it might, in the Westminster bubble, ruffle a few feathers. But I tell you, outside Westminster, in my constituency, when I go and meet people around the country, I'm met with overall gratitude for being a voice for the law-abiding patriotic majority, as I like to call it, the silent majority out there. And I think right now, elements of that section of our electorate feel unheard and as if they don't have a voice.
Now, you mentioned Rwanda, and of course we're speaking on the week that the Rwanda bill has finally passed the Lords and is on its way to becoming law. I suppose from where you sat in the Home Office, I mean, what do you think is, I suppose, it's quite clear you opposed it and thought it should have gone further, but in terms of what Rishi Sunak decided on, do you think there's a serious chance of a flight or two before the election, and what kind of time frame do you think?
I think there's a possibility of the odd flight. Or two, as you put it, within months. And I think having worked on the operational plans and seen some of the detail and seen the clauses in this now third Act of Parliament that we've enacted to stop the boats, I think a token flight is definitely feasible. That's not the test. We've promised to stop the boats, and we only stop the boats if we deliver an effective and meaningful deterrent. And that means regular flights, more than once a week, with hundreds of people on those flights going to Rwanda. A large-scale operation, very logistically challenging, and giving the Home Office quite a lot of ability to exercise its powers. This bill, I believe, precludes that from happening. So whilst we might get a token flight off, I don't think we'll get the large number of flights that we need in short order to deliver a deterrence. And that's why ultimately, regrettably, because I really want this government to succeed on this problem, regrettably, I don't believe this act will stop the boats.
So in a way, it might do parts of the policy by letter, but not in spirit in terms of what it actually needs to do.
There are too many gaps. There are too many caveats. There are too many loopholes. And listen, I've worked in this field for a long time. Before I was an MP, I was a barrister defending the Home Office in immigration cases in court. I was up against these lawyers who know every trick in the book. As Attorney General, I worked on this to when the flight was grounded. And then when I was Home Secretary, I came face to face with the operational realities of it. In my view, in my considered view, I don't think we've tightened up the legislation sufficiently, and I think the loopholes will be exploited. There'll be too many claims, there'll be too many appeals, there'll be a whole industry of litigation, and that will only clog up the courts and stop the flights from taking off.
And why don't you think Rishi Sunak listened to you on that?
That's a really good question that you'd have to ask him, wouldn't you? But I think, I tried valiantly for over a year to make the case to him. And I compromised with him on the Illegal Migration Act. So, I fronted up a piece of legislation around this time last year. It didn't go nearly as far as I thought it needed to exclude human rights laws and claims and the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. But I compromised in the spirit of being a team player, supporting the Prime Minister, and hoping that I could keep persuading him. I think ultimately the Westminster machine, a lot of the people around the cabinet table don't want to upset the legal establishment. They don't want to upset the Lords. They don't want to, stray. A lot of people say, well, our international reputation would be at risk. I think that's cobblers, and I think that is what people say when they've lost the argument on the actual substance.
Liz Truss, who you also served for when she was Prime Minister, said at the launch of Popular Conservatism, which I don't think you were at. But
I wasn't,
no. No, but she said that the problem was too many figures in the Tory party want to be invited to North London dinner parties. Do you think it's that, or do you think it's the fact that they want to be almost perhaps have a post-politics career where they're accepted on the world stage? Is there some truth in it somewhere, that type of thing?
I think there is some truth in that. I think when you put your head above the parapet and you speak uncomfortable truths, whether it's like we need to leave the ECHR and we need to do it now, or multiculturalism is failing, or there's two-tier policing, you're challenging the status quo, you're challenging the establishment view. And that takes bravery, it takes courage, but it does also mean, you know, social friction, let's say, and social tension if you're working in Westminster on a daily basis. I think it takes bravery and courage to speak up and say it how it is.
You mentioned migration generally, and of course legal migration is a big part of it. And as Home Secretary, behind the scenes, you often pushed for Rishi Sunak to go further. I think there's a feeling that some of the measures came in a bit too late, didn't go far enough from the right of the party. And I don't think you've finished reading Liz Truss's book yet.
But I haven't started it, if I'm honest.
You're at her book launch though, so maybe it's at your house now.
Do you know what? I missed the opportunity to get a signed copy.
We'll find you one. But one of the things in the book is she talks a lot about the need to have immigration control. But I just wondered, when you served as Home Secretary for Liz Truss, as I understand, I think it was reported quite widely at the time, you were often pushing for more controls on immigration against her perhaps wanting to relax them for the OBR. And I just wondered, is that a fair summary? And have at times you felt as though you're really an alone force inside various governments trying to push for some of these measures?
I have felt alone in prosecuting these arguments in government in the past. And, you know, in relation to the Liz Truss premiership, I was really keen. You know, I was very alarmed about the record number of visas that had been issued up until June 2022, topped 1 million for the first time, work and study visas. And it looked as if net migration was going to go off the scale for those autumn numbers. They did. And I went into the Home Office in the September of 2022, determined to turn this tide and use the time available in this Parliament to try and rein in the numbers. And it's very easy to do, actually. And this was my argument to both Liz and Rishi. The boats, everyone cares about the boats. The boats is really important, and we've made this important pledge. We've got to do everything we can on the boats. But one, it's smaller numbers, and two, it's really, really difficult. We've got a whole legal industry up. We're up against a legal industry. We're up against the court in Strasbourg. You know, it's incredibly difficult. Let's tackle legal migration, because compared to the boats, it's really easy to do. All you need to do, Prime Minister, is give me the green light. And at the Home Office, I just need to say the word to my officials and we can make it happen. We can raise the salary threshold pretty quickly. We can put a cap on numbers. We can limit the number of dependents. We can restrict the number of students. We don't need to pass a law. We don't need to worry about the Human Rights Court. We don't need to worry about any of that. And it's so easy to do that if we take the steps now, early on in the Parliament, we can demonstrate at the next election to people that if we have failed on the boats, we can still show that where we had the power and where we had the ability to control migration, we really used it to the benefit of the British people as they instructed us to do. And so I think that's a compelling and defensible position to go to the electorate with at the next general election. So please give me the authority to do this. But, you know, it was resisted around the cabinet table. And
with both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, did you feel as though the blocker was the arguments that this is too much of a shock for the economy? We need to show this in terms of the economy and therefore we cannot take these measures.
The economic arguments prevailed. So, and they were very heavily informed by the OBR. The OBR has operated on the premise that more migration is automatically a good thing for growth, without looking at GDP per capita, which has been woeful despite rising levels of migration, without looking at wage suppression, without looking at pressure on housing supply or house prices, without looking at the costs of migration. For example, the costs that migrants posed by using schools or health services. None of that is factored into the OBR's calculation of the benefit or otherwise of migrants coming into this country. And particularly in light of, and I think that's a big failing of the OBR, particularly in light of the fact that many of the migrants coming in are low-skilled, low-wage migrants. Now, I'm not against migration. I think I can be cast as being anti-migration. For personal reasons, I'm not against migration, but also for economic and political reasons, I'm not against migration. We do need migrant labour. We do welcome foreign students, and that's a good thing for our economy. But the scale and the pace that it's happened at is totally unreasonable and unsustainable. And that's why there is now a compelling and irresistible case to take robust and meaningful action, which I'm afraid the government hasn't yet done.
If Rwanda does not get up and going before the election, do you think this government, led by Rishi, would consider leaving the ECHR? Did you get much of that sense from being inside government? Because often you'll get statements saying they're not ruling it out, but you never quite know if that's just playing to the gallery.
I'm afraid I'm a bit cynical, as is suggested in your question, but I'm not persuaded by the noises that the government is making. I mean, just today, Lord Cameron's come out and set out his very emphatic view that we don't need to leave the ECHR. I disagree with him on this. I think it's absolutely essential.
I suppose he did ignore the ECHR at one point when he was Prime Minister.
He did ignore it. It was a fudge for over a decade. But ultimately, I would rather be intellectually honest with the British people and with the core and with the international community. We're either in or out, I think. And we've tried this fudge. It took 10 years to actually resolve itself. I don't think it was clear. And I don't think breaching the ECHR is the right thing to do as well, because I respect the international rules-based order. I think the cleanest and clearest thing to do is to leave, so come out of the ECHR now. Let's not put it in a manifesto commitment or referendum.
Even though people haven't voted on it.
Well, people have voted for us to stop the boats and to control illegal migration. And I think we've tried everything. We've tried 3 acts of parliament. We've tried negotiating with the French. We've tried deals. We've tried all sorts of things. Nothing's worked. I think the British people would support what they voted for in 2019, which was to do whatever it takes to stop the boats. We invoke Article 58 now of the ECHR. That gives 6 months' notice to the Council of Europe to leave. We pass a tightly drafted piece of legislation to repeal the Human Rights Act and to enact a British Bill of Rights that means that we are out of the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights, and we have English courts, English judges and English law, which is regulating this issue.
Now, this week you've been talking about whether the head of the Met should resign, suggesting that he should resign. And the trigger, though you have been very critical in the past, comes down to Gideon Falter in this clip. Now, you've been talking about the clip where a man is told off for being too Jewish, effectively as though he is therefore attracting the problems at a pro-Palestine march. When you were doing media earlier in the week, people started to say there are longer clips. This guy has gone out and he's almost looked for controversy before. Have you changed your view on it at all? Or?
No, not at all. In fact, the longer clip reinforces my view. And it's not because of this incident, it's because of everything that's happened over the 6 months, and it's a culmination. And this incident shines a light on what's been happening on the streets of London, and it's totally disgraceful and it's totally unacceptable. And if it involved another ethnicity, I think there would be universal outrage and Sir Mark Rowley would be out of his job as of today. But because it's about Jewish people, I'm afraid there seems to be a societal and institutional shutdown. And by that I mean a higher tolerance of anti-Semitism. It's as has been written, Jews don't count. And I feel so angry about the injustice. There is double standards here in terms of how the Met Police are policing these protests, and they are ignoring the Jewish community. They are enabling and supporting the pro-Palestinian marchers to carry out glorification of terrorism, anti-Semitism, the chanting of jihad, shouting anti-Semitic language as if there's no problem, harassment, intimidation and abuse, wearing masks, scaling war memorials, firing flares, and the police just say, there's no crime here. And yet, when a Jewish man is just simply walking across the road, He's not waving a flag. He's not protesting. He's not intimidating. He's not aggravating any situation. He's threatened with arrest. It is a total disservice to not just the Jewish community, but British people as a whole. And for that, I think it's unforgivable. And that's why I don't say this lightly, because I know it's very, very difficult to police these protests. But we've had 6 months, and London has become a no-go zone for Jewish people approximately once a week. And that is just something we all have to shrug our shoulders and accept.
Yeah, so therefore, even if he was looking to create a moment and a publicity stunt, it was to prove a point of something that's been there for some time. Is your point?
I mean, what I find shocking is the attempt to blame the victim, and that somehow his intention to cross the road needs to be undermined and looked at as blameworthy. And again, we wouldn't do that with any other victim of crime. We would look at them at face value and say that this person was choosing to exercise their rights legitimately, peacefully, and reasonably. And this person. I mean, this is the way the Met has responded. In fact, the Mayor of London came out endorsing the Met Commissioner following this incident. The Met Commissioner has, the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister, all coming out supporting the Met Commissioner. The Met Commissioner has praised the officer involved, and I don't criticise those officers on the ground. They're in really difficult situations. That officer's just following orders. He's just doing what his seniors are telling him to do. This is about the leadership. Strategic errors have been made, tactical errors have been made, and the Met has chosen a side. Plain and simple. And that's what is totally unacceptable about their approach to this.
And you think they do have the laws to be able to act on these things? Because some will say, for example, just before you left your role, when it was talking about banning a protest on Remembrance Sunday, that the level of which you have to ban it, of saying that you couldn't handle it on a security level, is so hard to reach, that it's very hard for police to ban these protests. And what's more, actually some of the rules around what they can stop and what they can't stop, say that they often mean that they're unable to do what the government wants them to do.
I think they do have the powers to some part, and then I also think the government needs to introduce new powers. So for example, chanting anti-Semitic tropes like "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," calling Israel a genocide state, a Nazi state, an apartheid state. That is all anti-Semitic language. That is anti-Semitic hatred. That's racial abuse. And yet the police don't take any action against it. I wrote to the police at the beginning of these protests, setting out my view. And I said, this is all unlawful. You can arrest for that. They chose not to do that. But on the other hand, when it comes to banning a march, you're right. So what the law currently says is that the Met Commissioner, if in his view he considers that there's a threat to public safety or he doesn't have sufficient resource, then he can apply to the Home Secretary for permission to ban the march. Now, this was done previously, and the previous Met Commissioner applied to Theresa May to ban an EDL march. Had the Met Commissioner applied to me to ban the march, I would have granted that application and we would have banned the march, particularly on Armistice Day. Now, I support the right to peaceful protest. I think it's the foundation of our democracy. But when we've seen 6 months of what are hateful protests, now it's not every single person on the march, but I think when you see this level of violence, this level of threat and abuse, such that the police themselves have said that someone can't cross the road because there's a threat of attack, I do think that we've reached the point where the Met Commissioner should be asking the Home Secretary to ban the march. I think that the law is insufficient and there needs to be a change in the law to allow the Home Secretary to proactively ban a march in exceptional, and I use that word really deliberately, exceptional circumstances. And I think we are in exceptional circumstances after such protracted protests, hateful protests, and the fact that now, we've got normalised anti-Semitism on the streets of Britain.
Now, to bring it back, I suppose, to where the Tory party sits right now, which obviously dictates how much the Tory government can do, and if there is going to be another one anytime soon. We look at the polls. As you said earlier, they're pretty dreadful, 20 points, 22 points, lots of predictions of a Labour supermajority. A lot of your colleagues, when I speak to them, some publicly, more privately, will say it's no longer a case that the Tories can win. It's about trying to stop a total wipeout and maybe a more manageable defeat. Do you agree with that?
I still think we can win, and I very much hope we can win, because I dread the prospect of a Keir Starmer government. I think he would undo Brexit. I think he would not apologise for increased migration, and I think he would, I think he's more left wing than he lets on. So I think, and on woke things, he'd rather take the knee than stand up for British values, and can't define what a woman is, or at least he's taken several years. He has been talking
about the flag a lot recently.
He's been trying to redeem himself on that front, because he's very self-conscious of Emily Thornberry. But we all remember what Emily Thornberry said about the St George's flag. So I really dread the thought of a Labour government. I still think we can win, because I don't think the public are overly enamoured by Keir Starmer for those reasons, and I think they are intelligent enough to see through the facade and the flag waving. I think we need to change course. This is on the Conservative Party. This is up to us, and it's very much in our gift to reclaim the situation.
And do you think you can win with Rishi Sunak as leader?
Listen, I think I fully expect Rishi Sunak to lead us into the next general election, and I'll keep urging. I was urging him privately as Home Secretary to change course and be bolder and be braver, and to speak to that coalition of voters who put us into office in 2019, that very unique combination of, northern Brexit voters who had never voted Conservative in the past, but were inspired by our message about Brexit, self-government, lower migration, and southern Conservative voters. I think that coalition is eminently achievable with the right policies. And I think that's what needs to happen. So, something meaningful and vivid on illegal migration, something robust on legal migration, like a cap on overall numbers. If he came out and said that, and actually, limited the number categorically, I think that would send a very strong message to the British people that we're serious about migration. Something meaningful and that can be felt on tax cuts and on the economy. The announcement on defence spending is a very good one. And I welcome that one. But also, we can't deny that, a lot of this woke, I don't like that word, but that politically correct virtue signalling capture of institutions, whether it's on transgender ideology or whether it's decolonising the curriculum and denying our past, a lot of that's happened under a Conservative government, and we haven't been robust enough. So a robust approach to the Equality Act and actually, transgender ideology and actually single-sex spaces and standing up for British values in schools. I think something like that we'd be able to redeem the situation.
Yeah, and on that, just two final questions. You mentioned reform. Now, I wondered, do you think the answer to reform is saying to some of the figures, come over to us? Or do you think it's actually some of the policies you mentioned would be enough to stop the need for the Reform Party?
Well, electorally speaking, we need to offer a policy platform which speaks to those disgruntled Conservatives, because at the moment I think our big weakness is that we're losing Conservative voters. We're losing 2019 Conservative voters, we're losing Brexit supporters, and we're losing those people who voted for us for the first time in 2019. And those people are who are going to reform. So I think the appropriate policy manifesto that I just set out would bring those people back, and I think it would persuade them that we're serious about the issues they care about. And listen, I think we need to embrace those people who support those policies, and we should be a broad church, and we should be welcoming to people who want to join the Conservative Party,
including those called Nigel Farage.
If Nigel Farage applied to join the Conservative Party and left Reform, I would welcome him with open arms.
And then finally, we're speaking on a day where there are rumours once again of a summer election. The idea that Rishi Sunak might roll the dice sooner than some expected. Do you think that would be a good idea?
Listen, the when is not so important to me as the what we're doing, to be honest. I think, if I were in government now, I would be saying change course and then call an election to run on your policy offer. A summer election, it's unusual, isn't it? A July, August election, it's slap bang in the middle of people's holidays. Not sure we would get be very popular on that front, but
maybe marginally better than a Christmas election, but still cutting it fine.
Well, the pre-Christmas election 2019 worked out very well for us. What we don't want is a January election, because that ruins everybody's Christmas with people electioneering
see the Tories get down to 10 points
and neurotic parliamentary candidates not able to enjoy Christmas with their families. So a January election would actually be the worst thing. Listen, I think we should, I think we need the time to demonstrate that we are serious about winning this election, that we're a proper Conservative party, and we need to reclaim that inspiring vision of self-government, control of our borders, national security, the law, being the party of law and order and low taxation. That's a formula that people are crying out for, and they're crying out for it from the Conservatives. It's up to us to deliver it.
Thank you, Suella Braverman.
Thank you.